25 years ago, Taliban swept into Kabul, backed by Pakistan military and ISI. We are now in September 2021. The story repeats. What's happening here?
What happened in 1996 was very different from what happened on August 15th in 2021. In 1996, when the Taliban entered Kabul, they entered more as soldiers who won the battle of Bharath. So they go back to 624 AD and destroyed everything that they thought was un-Islamic. But their return in 2021 is very different from what happened 25 years ago. Looking back and with hindsight, they have come this time to govern. Islam has established itself for them. There's nothing un-Islamic, but they want certain law and order as per the Sharia. So they have come to govern, and that is their game plan as I see. So they are definitely different from Taliban Edition 1. I won't say this is Taliban Edition 2, but I will say this is the Taliban of 2021.
This Taliban is also very different in its composition from the earlier Taliban of 1996. How does that play into their governance aspirations?
See, I would rather look at it first. The emergence of Taliban was somewhere in between September, October 1994. They came in more to set certain order because of the constant fights between Hekmatyar and Masood. Hekmatyar attacking Kabul, Masood defending Kabul. These things were happening. So, and to set some order, the Taliban came in, of course sponsored by Pakistan then, and they came in as a fresh breeze to end this internal conflict. But then nobody knew what it would be with power in their hands. So what we saw when power came to their hands in September 1996 gave a different picture of the Taliban that emerged in 1994. So I would say that was the first edition. The second edition was their entering Kabul. Now this Taliban 2021 is very different. And yes, the structure is different. Mullah Omar is not there. Many people are not there. And this Taliban definitely has been exposed to ways of the world and still exposed to what I call the Islamic ethics of the Middle East. And their experience and hospitality received in Doha explains many aspects of their present conduct. So I have not, looking at it, I have not forgotten the old Taliban of 1996, but the present Taliban come as a very different breed.
One of those striking differences that's occupied a lot of media space is the presence of the Haqqani network in this present structure of Taliban. And Sirajuddin Haqqani is on the sanctions list. So are a couple of other people in the present government. There is a sense of discomfort amongst many countries on how does one establish relationship with a group that's proscribed, has deep connections with Al-Qaeda and other groups. And for 20 years, the US and its allies fought a war on terror against this set of people, and now having to see them in government. It's almost like, everything's flipped over. It's turned topsy-turvy. Where does that leave this region?
Well, let me go back. Haqqani network and going to the times of Jalaluddin Haqqani. Now, the Haqqani network of that era of jihadi or jihad movement in Afghanistan during the Soviet occupation or Soviet intervention, the important thing is that Haqqani network is very different from the Haqqani network of today. At that time, they were trying to fight and try and evict the Soviet forces out of Afghanistan. So they were a different lot and their strategy was different. Now, I shall not delve too much on Jalaluddin Haqqani because he is no more, but the new set of Haqqanis that are in play today are definitely different. Sirajuddin, the representative of the Haqqanis today, is better off advising the Emir of the Faithful, the head of the Taliban, than to be a Minister of Interior. But well, that is part of the politics, and they also want power, so they have taken the power in their hands. But the important thing is Sirajuddin Haqqani may not necessarily be the way we think he is. If the rest of the leadership has changed in its attitude to Afghanistan and attitude to coming into Kabul and thinking in terms of governance, so Sirajuddin has to fall in line whether he likes it or not. There is definitely a concern and a problem for Afghans because Sirajuddin Haqqani's men, who the Afghanis refer to as the Talibani Dusht, which literally means they are the Taliban who are rogues, bandits, goons. And these are the people. And they go as in the garb and masquerade as what is known as Taliban-e Jangi. They are the Taliban fighters. So they reduce the difference between things by trying to also police and be the Islamic fighters. Now, that is of concern because when a rogue, when a thug or a bandit decides to behave like the policeman, then there is more fear of these characters than the police itself. So therefore, this will be resolved. This kind of chaotic situation that will manifest as things go, if uncontrolled, will be best decided upon by the collective leadership of the Taliban. And if the Haqqanis are not susceptible to this kind of a disciplining, then you might as well wait for on-the-street war, and war could break out, and there's something that is even worse. Because when war breaks out on the streets of Kabul, whatever little construction, whatever little development has been witnessed in Kabul gets again demolished. And we might also well go back to the time when Hikmatyar was bombing Kabul and destroyed Kabul, flattened Kabul almost. So that is the kind of situation even the current Taliban would avoid. They'd rather deal with Sirajuddin and his men firmly and get them online, or see to it that the one way or the other that there will be rule and order in Kabul, and which means also the whole of Afghanistan. So that is what we should look forward to. So to me, the Haqqani network does not spell doom. They need to be controlled. They will be controlled internally. And I will not bandy this thing that, oh, the Haqqanis are this, Haqqanis are that, or even take a bite from Imran Khan saying that the Taliban are a tribe, Pashto tribe, or one of my colleagues who also says that the Haqqanis are not even Pashtus. So I don't want to get into those kind of things, but we know that the Haqqanis are very much there in the present setup, and that is our concern, and to see how stable Kabul will get. That is the aim of the Taliban, and that is the aim of everybody who's supporting Taliban in the present context.
It's interesting you say that there is a collective leadership when it comes to Taliban, but we also know that it is not one monolith. It's comprised of many factions, many groups. How does that interplay? And the other interesting point about how this Taliban is different because they've been shaped by their influence in the Middle East. They've had an office in Qatar, for instance, where they've been talking to other countries and their representatives. All of these influences coming into play in 2021, how does that play out? On one hand, there is a need to show strength in terms of collective leadership. On the ground, there are many various groups. And then there is an expectation that this Taliban will at least take forward or consolidate some of the social progress in terms when it comes to, let's say, the status of women in Afghanistan. How will all of this complexity play out in the next few months or years?
You refer to the women and the status of Taliban. I mean, the status of women in a Taliban power system or Taliban rule. Now, I'll take you back to 1996 when they came in October, when they passed an order saying that Taliban women should be confined to their homes and they should not be found in public unescorted, or that they be fashionably dressed, attracting men like it was in pre-Islamic days. If you go back to the 1996 decree of theirs on the status of women and the role of women, that is what they are not revisiting this time. The fact that we have to understand and note is that the women and their men colleagues are back to Kabul International Airport to manage and keep it operational. And the only thing that the men and the women have said that was that we need to be paid for our work. Now, that is a very good sign that the women are back to work at the Kabul International Airport. One. Two, there's another very good indication. With the fall of Panjshir to the Taliban in the first week of September 5th maybe, September 3rd, between 3rd and 5th. So, the women in Kabul were protesting against Pakistan's assistance to Taliban to aerial bomb Panjshir. The women were not in burqas. And as the women were getting belligerent and growing in numbers, the Taliban had to fire in the air to disperse the crowd. But till they fired in the air, they gave a very tolerant look to the demonstrators. That also explains the current position of what the Taliban are. I think we have to take these little steps as a positive sighting of what is to be. And I started with that women coming back to work at the Kabul International Airport. Then I took you to this thing of the operations, the demonstrations in Kabul street against Pakistan's intervention. So what we see today is the Taliban are showing tolerance. The third factor is that their handling of the former government employees, the former government's employees, and bringing them back to office to work, is that they have had a very understanding and tolerant view that they should be at work. And these are some signs that we have to take note of. Of course, there is another narrative which will tell you that the Taliban is a Taliban is a Taliban. But then give them a chance. We'll see. Of course, we have seen some assassinations that have happened to people running the anti-terrorist operation. But then that is vengeful and that would have happened either ways. So this is what I would look at as, I wouldn't say collateral damage, but something that had to happen, and it's like manifestation of some suppressed desires. That you have been persecuted before, so you overcome that suppression and do something in return. But fortunately, that is not the daily event that we thought would be. And I've seen certain visuals from Tolo TV news, and there is a resemblance of normalcy returning to the markets. So let us give them a chance. See, this Taliban that has come is definitely a legitimate face of Afghan politics. We can't dismiss them as not representing Afghans. They have come because they have had a cross-section of support throughout the country. Like, how do you explain that the Taliban took over Badakhshan, strong Tajik hold? That's because the Taliban cut across ethnic lines to solicit support, and there was a seamless dislike for Ghani's corrupted administration. So overcoming that was to get united, and the Taliban was able to unite. The very fact, even Mazar-e-Sharif fell, and the Taliban commander was this man Hamza Kudratullah, and he's a Tajik commander who has worked who has fought along with Ahmad Shah Massoud.
And he had close relationship with Marshal Dostum as well.
Yes. And then you have the chief of the Taliban army, Qari Fasihuddin. He's a Qari. And he was a close associate of the former late President Rabbani. How do you explain this? There must have been some serious thought behind that the Tajiks are also joining the Taliban. This you never heard of in 96 to 2000 or 2001. Never heard of it. When you talk about the Taliban those days, it was only Pashtun.
In fact, there was so much conversation, chatter about this new Taliban composition of Pashtun nationalists and fascists, and how the current, at that time, the government of President Ghani was not too opposed to this kind of Taliban coming into play. I mean, there was a lot of this chatter about his willingness to hand over power and all, and much before August 15th collapse. So there seems to be some authenticity to this, that it is not one monolith Pashtun, a movement, but they've managed to work across ethnicities and the divide.
Ghani administration, to start with, was reeking with corruption. And the former Northern Alliance elements who joined in the coalition were no less than Ghani's men. Integrity was a very rare thing to see in Ghani administration, and the constituents of the Ghani administration included Tajiks, Pashtuns, and a smattering of Hazaras. But then, such administration cannot last. It has to give way. And the fact that even what was first called the National Resistance Front, Ahmad Massoud calls it today the Northern Resistance Front. And as I see it, there can't be a Northern Alliance Chapter 2. In a war-weary Afghanistan, resistance against a cohesive Afghanistan gains credence, and people want that. And how it comes is irrelevant. If it comes even via the Taliban rule, you have a coercive Afghanistan, which is in India's interest. A coercive Afghanistan, a united Afghanistan, where all ethnic groups are considered, remain Afghans and work for Afghanistan, that is what will finally score, and that is exactly what India should be supporting. And we have our grievances against Pakistan. We all think in terms of Pakistan and Taliban collaborating to keep troubling India. Well, Pakistan's major occupation is troubling India. If it's not troubling India, it will go out of existence. So it's their bread and butter to exist. India. They have India, thankfully, for their existence. Otherwise, Pakistan would have long disappeared as a failed nation. And anyway, it is on its way out. Once you have a course of Afghanistan, that is our choice, and that should be our choice. Pakistan, what Pakistan is doing, etc., our defense forces should handle. We can't ask foreign policy to handle that. The foreign policy has to adjust to the present changed situation in Afghanistan. Yesterday's leaders who were sanctioned by the US government today are welcomed in Washington. So the Taliban who were blamed as the terrorists were actually handed over to Afghanistan by the allies who came to give and ensure an enduring freedom.
What you say is interesting because the street conversations in the streets of Kabul and elsewhere, and a lot of it we are seeing through independent Twitter feeds, women are leading that discourse. For instance, the chant "Death to Pakistan" were being led by women protesters. This promotion of this Twitter hashtag "Sanction Pakistan." Again, a lot of it promoted by women protesters on the streets of Afghanistan. So the Afghans are very clear where their interests lie. And if one were to then connect that to India's foreign policy interest, as you just said, it would be prudent on India's part, if I were to take your argument or your point of view forward, to engage with the current regime, whatever shape it is in this point in time, because Pakistan should not be a factor in the conversation that India should be having with the regime in Afghanistan. Is that formulation something that sits well with you?
Well, in foreign policy, India's foreign policy and relations with Taliban per se, or with Afghanistan, Taliban-ruled Afghanistan per se, I would not burden any thinking and thoughts Pakistan. I wouldn't give that importance. I would satirize that. Pakistan is irrelevant to India building relations with Afghanistan, the present dispensation. The very fact that Sheru Stanekzai, an IMA product, of course, people will say, the Pakistanis will say he is India-stained, but he is a Taliban. He has been there before, he has been there with them. He has not changed sides. And he sought a meeting with our ambassador in Doha. We responded correctly, and the ambassador met him. I do not know whether he sought the ministry's permission to meet him. Had it been me, I would have met him and told the ministry, yes, I met him. Rather than tell the ministry that. And then, after having met our envoy meeting Stanekzai, our spokesman belittled that little meeting, an important meeting, by stating that our envoy met Stanekzai at his request. What are you trying to score? A meeting is a meeting. Who calls you is irrelevant. They met, discussed something substantial. Don't score a point that, oh, I met him because he called me. And then thereafter, we are literally treating it like a very adulterous meeting. Secretly, like, maintain secrecy, cover it. What is there? There's nothing secret. No information can be secret. It's how you use the information. That is the secret.
So in this context, just to wrap up this segment, all of this thing about, and it's all well known now, about Pakistan's support, drone support, military support on the ground, etc. Eventually, from what we are learning from you is that Pakistan's role in Afghanistan is set for a diminishing returns. And therefore, that role must be put aside if India really has to find a strategic pathway into that region.
As a start, I would be very charitable if I say that Pakistan has some diminishing marginal returns. I look at it this way: Pakistan, with its skeletal economy, cannot run its Afghan affairs with the framework of trying to rule and be a decider on Afghan affairs. The ISI may want. The very fact that the ISI chief going into Kabul without the general headquarters being aware itself is scorned at by the army establishment in Pakistan. So if there are stories saying that there are fissures within the Pakistani army establishment, give it some credence, but don't take it too seriously. But when it comes to India, all the generals will be united. So let us keep that aspect out and let us not gloat over it, but let us look at it specifically. Does Pakistan have any influence over the Taliban today? And frankly, the Taliban have not taken initiatives to encourage the meetings with Pakistan or encourage Pakistanis to come in and be there, give unsolicited counseling. But the ISI chief going to Kabul was certainly unsolicited. He wanted to visit Kabul and they said, all right, you come over. And that's how he went. Looking at Panjshir again, that assistance that Pakistan gave was not for the downfall of Panjshir. So let us not read it that way. Panjshir fell for a different reason, which we can look at it differently. But at the moment, Pakistani influence over Taliban is a matter of perception. If you are anti-Pakistan, you will say, yes, they are there. If you think Taliban is a stooge of Pakistan, then that's a different thinking. But the Taliban today are no stooge of no one, least of all Pakistan.
Thank you. When we go into the next segment, we will look at how the other countries are looking at this new equation, and we'll also delve a little bit into the resistance movement and what's really happening in Panjshir Valley.
Thank you.